Welcome, everyone. This is Greg Rock, and on behalf of BPM Institute and Forrester Research and Savvion, I'd like to welcome you to today's roundtable, addressing challenges in communications and media using BPM. Clay Richardson, Senior Analyst with Forrester Research, is going to kick off today's webcast for us, and he'll be followed up by Sanjay Kumar, VP of Communications and Media Solutions with Savvion. We have an awful lot of members within BPM Institute's community from these two areas, and we're very excited that both of these gentlemen will be able to join us today to do a little bit more of a deep dive of the issues and solutions that are available to folks in both communications and media. As a quick housekeeping note, our roundtable series is one of the ways in which BPM Institute promotes knowledge sharing and networking amongst our members. You can find additional details on our website, on our conference series, training programs, and electronic bulletins, and more. So without further delay, I'd like to turn things over today to Clay Richardson.
Thanks, Greg. That was a great introduction. So what I want to share today is industry insights around BPM trends and best practices in the telecoms industry. And prior to joining Forrester, I spent time working with both federal customers on BPM projects and also helped telecommunications customers in the private sector, and really found BPM lent itself very well to telecommunications solutions. And the slides that I'll walk through really paint a picture of some of the challenges that telecommunications, the industry as a whole, are facing, and how BPM really is suited to address those challenges. And so the biggest challenge that we see facing telecommunications, the industry as a whole, is the fact that there's been massive consolidation, which has been combined with innovation in the mobile and mobile handheld market. And so what we're really seeing is companies come together very quickly through consolidation, but greater demand and greater stress put on the different telecommunications networks. And so it's interesting to note an article that I read recently in New York Times highlighted the fact that with the iPhone and the bandwidth that has been promoted or allowed by the iPhone, people like myself, being able to watch video and do really different things with the iPhone with unlimited bandwidth, that it's really put stress on the networks, and it's really forcing the entire industry to look at upgrading to be able to support things like video and unlimited data downloads. And so this is really forcing not only the rapid consolidation that we're seeing at an industry level, it's also forcing a rapid focus on operational processes and improving those processes across both network provisioning and interacting with customers and supporting customers. And so what we're seeing BPM be able to do is connect these different heterogeneous applications that have come together as a result of consolidation, but also connect to the front end interactions with customers. And so we'll step through this, some of the trends in more detail, and also look at some of the solutions here. So the first piece of data that we want to share with you, and really what we've heard from you in the telecoms industry, is that you're projecting flat revenue growth during the recession. And so if you look at the news, some people are saying the recession is over. But based on actual revenue, a lot of firms, not just in telecoms, but across private sector, really feel there's a ways to go before the recession is officially over. And so this survey that we took earlier in the year, in Q1, and published in Q3, really highlights the fact that most telecoms leaders and decision makers really see flat revenue growth for the rest of the year and on into next year, with many seeing less revenue year over year, or projecting less revenue. The bright spot is it is nice to see that a small handful, do expect higher revenue, but as a whole, the industry is expecting much lower revenue. And so what this introduces, what we've heard from a lot of the customers that we speak with in telecoms, is that they're really trying to squeeze out costs and reduce costs and control costs by controlling or reducing direct and indirect labor. And so a separate survey question in the survey that we put out in Q1 really looked at what actions are telecoms firms taking to control costs and manage costs. And at the top, you can see the reduced use of contractors and IT staff hiring freeze. And this is higher than what we've seen in the general across the industry, or across industries, I should say. But what's really interesting is looking at some of the other data points or some of the other actions that industry leaders are taking, like deferment of capital expenditures. So this really impacts budgets for new projects is what we're seeing. So some new projects getting deferred. And then if we go down one more, this ties directly to increased requirement to justify ROI for IT projects. So we're seeing IT leaders and telecoms really being pushed to build out an ROI model, but also drive time to value much faster. So instead of in the past, where telecoms leaders might have been able to say we have a 12 to 18-month payoff, they're really being forced into 6 to 9 month cycles where they can prove ROI to the CFO before they get investment. And so some of the other items that we have here are kind of novel, like reduced IT electricity usage, kind of getting into sustainability and even IT layoffs. But you can see the bulk of the actions are really focused directly on cost containment and managing capital much more effectively. So even though we have this a lot of innovation around mobile technology and that driving some of the activity in the telecommunications sector, we're not necessarily seeing increased or dramatic increased revenue to match. So just an interesting note. In the face of some of these challenges, a lot of telecoms leaders are turning to BPM to control costs. And if we look at this data is taken from our Q4 2008 survey of IT decision makers. And this is the annual survey we do to get a sense of, that Forrester does, to get a sense of where are different IT leaders planning to make investments in technology. And like I said, this cut comes directly from telecoms leaders that responded to the survey. And we could see what their plans were to implement BPM over the next 12 months. And what's interesting is when we look at all these numbers, we break it out into interested, considering, piloting, implementing, expanding, upgrading. It's really interesting to look at that only 30% are saying that they're not interested. So what we really see is about 65 to 70% of IT decision makers in telecom saying we are looking at BPM or we're planning to implement BPM. But at the same time, if we match that up to reduced revenue and reduced budgets, it really introduces a big challenge for these leaders looking at BPM or looking at different ways of controlling costs. And so what we're seeing as a trend, not just in BPM, but across the board, or I should say not in telecommunications, but across the board, is what we're calling lean BPM. And this is where organizations have seen an increased demand and appetite in business process management, essentially using technology and a methodology to control and manage business processes within the organization. So they're seeing this demand, increased appetite for BPM, but at the same time, we're seeing reduced budgets. And so a lot of teams are having to come up with different approaches to introducing and controlling processes without increasing the cost or the cost burden. And so some of the top trends we're seeing around lean business process management include BPM as a service. So a lot of the customers we talk to very interested in how can we implement our processes in the cloud to save costs. And so with BPM as a service, what you're ultimately looking at is not having to buy the infrastructure, not having to have a dedicated team to manage that infrastructure, so that ultimately teams are only focused on the actual building of the application and not the maintenance or the infrastructure that goes along with it. And so what we're seeing out there in the industry is vendors providing BPM as a service or BPM in the cloud at $30, $40 a month per person, which is significantly lower, on a per month basis than the traditional upfront investment. But the cautionary note here is, even though we're seeing people express a lot of interest, we're not seeing a lot of uptake of BPM as a service or BPM in the cloud yet. There's really a lot of interest that's driven by the cost model, if you will. So most customers looking at BPM as a service, they may start out playing with BPM in the cloud, but ultimately switch over to on-premise capabilities. The second trend that we see is platform convergence, and this really gets into where we see SOA and BPM in the same package. So software service-oriented architecture for tying together multiple disparate systems combined with business process management for automating processes across these systems. We're seeing these two pieces continue to merge and come together effectively. A new component on the landscape around convergence that we're also seeing is master data management and business process management methodologies coming together and vendors starting to address that issue. And this is an essential piece, essential component or trend for telecommunications, because if we go back to the consolidation issue and all of these different applications from different acquired providers, there's a need to tie all of this together, and so the platform convergence, which brings SOA, service-oriented architecture, along with master data management capabilities and tying that to BPM, is essential to tying everything together for telecoms providers. And also, we're seeing another trend that's very interesting, very fascinating, what we're calling lightweight BPM. And it's really BPM used for less operational processes, but more along the lines of HR, managing HR processes or smaller departmental processes. We're starting to see a lighter weight BPM capability around this that allows business analysts to become more involved. But in the telecommunications industry, just like platform convergence is essential, solutions frameworks are also evolving as an essential lean BPM component, because if we go back to the data that we had on the previous slide that highlighted the fact that IT leaders and decision makers have to build a solid ROI business case for investments, for technology investments, time to value becomes much more important, and solution frameworks really provides telecoms IT decision makers with a platform that already has some of the core key ingredients for their key processes, so they're not building all of that from scratch. So again, instead of a 12 to 18 month ROI cycle, they're able to focus on a 3 to 6 to maybe 9 month at the high end ROI cycle. And then the last most important piece that we're seeing in terms of lean BPM trends is an acceleration in firms establishing BPM centers of excellence. And this really focuses on the idea of managing end-to-end processes and building governance for teams to work together to improve processes and providing a support infrastructure around processes. And so we've seen an uptick in the number of center of excellence frameworks or initiatives launched within organizations. And so that just lays out some of the trends that we're seeing. But if we look directly in telecom, a lot of the customers that we talk to, there's consistent processes that we hear all the time that they're trying to tackle in telecom, and it goes right to the heart of this consolidation issue. One of the top processes that I talk to customers about, that we hear about, is trying to gain control over their order management systems. And so if we think about this consolidation, instead of having one order management system that the provider needs to work with after acquiring multiple other providers, now there's 4, 5, 6 different order management systems that they need to interact with and figure out how to integrate or consolidate. And this also applies to activation and provisioning. So not just managing the order and getting the new customer or new account into the system, it's also essential that vendors or providers are able to do activation and provisioning seamlessly across these different systems that have been acquired from other providers or through acquisition of other providers. And then we're also hearing feedback around call center management and revenue assurance. And so with call center management, a lot of it is about dispute resolution, where customers call in. This is what we hear from a lot of our telecoms customers, is they have a lot of customers calling in with complaints or issues around their bill, and then they need to resolve that so the customer doesn't call in the next time. But again, there's multiple systems where their bill is stored, so they really have to sort through all of these different systems to figure out which profile needs to be changed or updated. Ultimately, this gets into a master data management and data quality issue. And then finally, revenue assurance. We're not hearing as much about revenue assurance nowadays as we did, I would say, in 2005, 2006, and 2007. And revenue assurance really gets into making sure that what was invoiced and what was billed is actually what was paid. And so really going back through and making sure that the company or the provider is getting all of the expected revenue based on the original contract. And so what I want to do is zoom in on the first two that we get the most requests around. And so the first one, the order management process, is I think pretty much every telecoms provider that I talk to nowadays, this is the first topic that they focus on, is how do I improve order management? How do I make sure, even though we have multiple systems, that we're able to manage the order management process seamlessly for our customers? And the key here is order management, even without multiple acquisitions before consolidation, really was siloed under multiple departments and different applications. And so a lot of times providers that we speak with, even before consolidation, would talk about we can't see what's going on at the front end of the order management process when we take that initial order. And that has impacts downstream when we're actually beginning to either provision or when we're trying to upsell or cross-sell different capabilities. And so the net of it ultimately is poor end-to-end collaboration, where these teams really aren't able to see what's going on within each other's silos and really don't have a sense of the impact that their actions in one section of the silo will play in another section of the silo. And then management, in terms of order management process, management often complains of lack of visibility into the process itself. So what we're seeing a lot of providers request is better metrics, better dashboards, better BI or business intelligence capabilities to see exactly what's going on, spot trends, and pinpoint potential bottlenecks. And so we're seeing providers invest heavily both in business process management to actually address all of these, but also combining that with business intelligence so they get a unified view of what's going on across the organization. And so best practices around order management that we're seeing is, first and foremost, bringing the groups together that constitute the end-to-end process and really talking about each step along the way. One customer that I worked with around this, helping them automate their end-to-end, it was really amazing just to bring constituents from each part of the end-to-end order process together and just see the light bulbs going off, where one team was able to see, like, oh, you guys use that same data in that way? Well, maybe that should impact how we actually either enter the data, but also how we update the data and how the data gets viewed and how it's leveraged. And so really amazing to see teams come together in a single room around this to automate the end-to-end. So that's best practice number one, is just getting the people in the same room, even if it's just a couple of constituents from each silo or each phase of the process, get them in the same room, map out the end-to-end process together, and actually collaborate on potential improvements around the process. And then the other piece here is to make sure that you synchronize process and master data activities. And this is a key piece across the board that we're seeing, particularly in telecoms, where we have these legacy systems that we can't get rid of. There's a lot of data that's mandatory to be maintained in these systems, and it would be too costly to just throw them away and start from scratch. And so in this case, what we're seeing in a lot of cases is the master data team or data quality team remains separate from the actual business process management team. And this creates issues downstream where the data that is being pulled in by the process is not actually being synchronized back to legacy systems. And so you really want to address that up front as much as possible, actually bringing the data quality team and the business process management team together at the beginning or as often as possible to discuss touch points where business process management steps interact with specific data that has to be trusted, has to be maintained, has to be synchronized. And so that's another key best practice around improving order management. And then in terms of provisioning, this is the second process that we receive a lot of feedback from telecoms providers. And really the biggest issue with network provisioning is this no single view of the customer, right? And so these hodgepodge of systems really, in some cases when we talk to providers, to provision a single customer for a single order might require them to go into 5, 6, 7 different systems just to enable all of the key components. And that's problematic in terms of wasting time, but also the potential for accidental data entry, fat fingering, when they're entering in information. And then the other piece here is that we hear from telecoms providers, from customers like you, is the need to integrate OSS and BSS platforms. And so being able to tie in these systems that are facing the business with these operational systems, tying those systems together so you can have that single view is a key issue. And then the last piece we hear is this rapid dispute resolution across OSS and BSS. So when a ticket comes into the call center, actually taking time to resolve that issue, but then making sure the resolution is pushed down to the provisioning or to the service order layer, if you will, and then being able to give that feedback rapidly to the customer. And so this, in the current economic climate, most telecoms providers are very focused on managing customer relationships and making sure that the customer experience and customer satisfaction remains high, because competitively, it would be easy for the competitor to say, hey, we can do just as well or better and give you a lower price. And actually, it's kind of interesting, the trend that we're seeing in Central America and South America that we're not necessarily seeing in the U.S. so much is cost-cutting based on the usage and minute usage, to the point where they really have to compete more on the customer service and customer experience than on the actual pricing, because the pricing is so low. So that gets into some of the challenges that we see around network provisioning. In terms of best practices, again here, I can't stress this enough in terms of synchronizing BPM and MDM activities. We already talked a little bit about this, but this is an essential ingredient also in network provisioning. And then providing or developing service interfaces that connect these different systems. So leveraging SOA, leveraging BPM at a system and an integration level to tie these different layers together, to stitch them together seamlessly. So just to give you an example of a telecommunications giant that embarked on a BPM initiative and was very successful, has been very successful with the ongoing initiative. $10 billion telecom giant had executive support for BPM. Actually, it's interesting. This is a rare case where the executive team was actually driving BPM within the organization, as opposed to it being a bottom-up or middle management coming in saying, we got to improve our processes and we need BPM. was really the president of the company coming and saying, BPM is our number one priority, and we have to focus on this in terms of improving our processes to impact our customers and to be innovative. And another interesting piece of this is this particular telecommunications company had gone through two and a half years of breakneck acquisitions of smaller regional providers, and it really brought in multiple systems, multiple accounts, multiple ways of getting work done, and they've really had to figure out a way to streamline this. Not only streamline the process of order management and provisioning, but they also had to come up with a way to streamline getting these newly acquired providers on board in terms of being able to leverage their processes. So a couple of challenges there. Their biggest issue was limited visibility into quote-to-cash process, and so they couldn't really see what was going on at each phase of the process. But then the other challenge that they had is they knew that their quote-to-cash process was a 24-month cycle, because they also had to do build-outs for their network for new customers coming in many cases. And so in this scenario, they knew 24 months for end-to-end process. They knew they needed to cut that in half to improve cash flow. And so what they ended up doing is connecting their BPM strategy, first focusing on automating the end-to-end quote-to-cash process and providing visibility across. So at any step in the process, any of the stakeholders involved could see what step the process was at, what was coming down the pipe, in the pipeline, and could actually manage for that. But then they were also able to optimize the process so that issues that happen upstream did not necessarily have a negative impact on the process downstream. And this exercise actually was able to highlight some innovative approaches for them to identify customers up front that they could fast track through the process so that they could get to their cutting the time in half for the bulk of their customers. And so that was a pretty fascinating observation that they were only able to identify once they modeled out the process and brought all the team members together to understand what is the end-to-end process. And so ultimately they were able to cut quote-to-cash process time by 50%, but this project allowed them to actually begin to invest in other areas of the business with BPM. So that's just one example from their project. So what's interesting about BPM here is that most people see BPM or consider there's a perception of BPM as being a bloated approach to improving business processes, not just in telecoms, but also in across the board in other industries. And so this is what we're seeing. People looking at BPM as kind of this big sheet, and really, you know, their budget will only allow them to be the smaller sheet, right? Not so hairy, not so bloated and complicated and unwieldy. And so some of the things that we're recommending to customers to keep BPM from becoming bloated are first to focus on vertical solutions, and knowing that vertical solutions accelerate time to value. And so when you're looking at vertical solutions, most important thing that you want to look at is whether the provider of the vertical solution has built the solution on a BPM foundation. So that's the first piece. But then the second piece is making sure that they've defined a very solid object model. And that's one of the differentiators that I've found between BPM vendors or solution vendors that do a very effective job of building vertical solutions for telecoms versus vendors that just do templates, if you will. And so you want to look at the object model, make sure that they understand how you do business and how processes are executed within the telecoms vertical. But then the second piece is make sure that they provide flexible and extensible process models. So you should be asking, how can I change this model over time as my business changes? That should be a key question. And then another key piece is making sure that they provide integration with legacy investments. So whatever legacy system applications you have, make sure they have connectors or adapters, or at least have a methodology that will allow you to tie in their accelerator or their solution with your existing environment. And so the example I give here for Telecom's order management, just one process that we talked about before, you want to make sure that there's a predefined object model for OSS, BSS data structure. Make sure there's out-of-the-box processes for order management that can be configured or modified and extended. Then make sure there are connectors to existing CRM and legacy order applications. The other key piece is make sure that you adopt an agile methodology for delivering or implementing the solution. So instead of focusing on traditional waterfall approach where it's really define the requirements, build a solution, deploy it, you really want to adopt an agile approach that says we're going to deliver functionality very rapidly across a very short cycle or iterations. And we're really seeing companies able to deliver value very quickly using agile so the business gets what they want very rapidly up front, and then you can move on to add additional capability. And then another piece that we're recommending to leaders, to BPM leaders or companies looking at process is around lean thinking. And so the idea of lean thinking is to maximize value but minimize waste. So in this case with BPM, we're really saying make sure you focus on the people and the demand within the organization in terms of delivering value. And so this lays out the framework for lean. There's definitely a lot of content out there for lean on Forrester and out on the web. So this just gives you a framework to begin thinking around. And then the last piece that is critical as you look at BPM and look at vertical accelerators in telecoms that are based on BPM is you want to make sure you take time to establish some sort of BPM center of excellence, whether it's a BPM program, a BPM competency center, or BPM community of practice. You want to make sure you have governance around identifying which processes are important and prioritizing those processes, and then also putting governance in place that says who's actually going to approve processes, how are processes connected to strategy. And so the data point that we have here, even though it's a little bit dated, it actually highlights the fact that teams that had a BPM Center of Excellence had high rate of success versus teams that did not have a BPM Center of Excellence had a much lower rate of success around BPM. And so with that, I'll leave you with some of my contact information, but I'm going to hand it on over to Sanjay.
All right, Clay. Well, thank you very much. We greatly appreciate you bringing down your expertise and Forrester's insight to the issues that are currently facing folks in telecommunications, as well as some of the solutions and things that you're using to really commit to a continuous process improvement initiative. And if you can stay with us, Clay, we've got a few questions at the end that we'd like to send your way. But what I'd like to do right now is transition to Sanjay Kumar. Sanjay is a vice president at Savvion and manages Savvion's communication and media industry business practice, focusing on BPMS-based communication industry solutions, and brings over 20 years of experience from the communications and software industries with us. And so, Sanjay, welcome back.
Thanks, Greg. Just wanted to start adding to a lot of the key points that Clay had brought up in terms of what the challenges are in the industry and some key findings in the use of BPM in the telecom space. Quickly, just want to give an introduction of Savvion. We're a business process management software company. We've been a market leader since the BPM space has been initiated. And work across a number of verticals, but telecommunications is one that's a very key focus area for us. And in that light, I mean, although a lot of our customers may be household names across different industries, from financial services to healthcare to high-tech manufacturing, the telecom sector, and specifically around service providers and the equipment manufacturers, is an area that we've put a strong emphasis in terms of focusing on solutions specific to that arena. And in terms of that, what I want to do is try to describe some of the areas or kind of the pain points and solution sets that we see consistently in the communications industry. So if I kind of look at a lot of the the benefits that they gather from using Savvion and business process management software, is really that idea of visibility, much more visibility across the end-to-end process activities, the agility, really being able to move at a pace that's much more attuned to the pace of business. From an efficiency perspective, it's talking about really being able to optimize processes, have a constant improvement, and really combining those to really have business empowerment. So this is not just something that's an IT initiative, it's something that's really driven and well attained by the business side, where both organizations work very closely to have that constant improvement. And that really generates a really high return on investment and low total cost of ownership. In terms of where, if we think of the telecom sector around the OSS and BSS, operational support systems, business support systems, the areas that we see a lot of activities and where BPM-based solutions have a tremendous impact, they come in a number of areas, and I'm going to look at them through a few life cycles. So this one being the customer life cycle, really looking at a customer life cycle from 3 swim lanes, one representing initial contact with a customer through to sales, through to implementing them in service. The second swim lane is really once they are an active customer, their day 2 activities that may have service assurance components, changes to their service, and finally a view from service to cash from a billing perspective. And where we've found the real benefits with a BPM-based solution and solutions that we've been implementing around a few areas. Order management, customer order management is a very key point, and I'll certainly describe this in more detail. But it's one that we see consistently with all service providers as a fundamental challenge to what's happening in their current market, and an area where BPM-based solutions have a tremendous impact. Other areas around customer quoting, we see that certainly in light of being able to handle and modify changes in a much more rapid manner. Areas like non-standard deals. So, and for a lot of service providers, what may be their top 5 customers that are looking for not just implementing services, but really defining a product in doing so. And really need to be able to manage, on a program management perspective, all aspects of the organization. Other areas include things like mobile device returns and repairs, whether it's mobile devices or IP and other equipment-based returns and repair process. Things around trouble ticketing or really problem resolution, as well as on the billing stream, usage event resolution, bill disputes, collections and treatment. And what we've been seeing more and more is the whole customer experience management, or really visibility across all 3 segments, so to give a full view of what the customer is experiencing. Another view that we like to take is from the network management life cycle. So this is really all the activities that a service provider may be doing to expand their internal network, as well as interactions they do with other service providers in dealing with activities that are done off their network. So in terms of where BPM has been very effective within the network process, includes things like that network ordering and provisioning. How do you build 50 location solutions where you may have outside plant construction and equipment installs, and coordinating just a large number of activities across various groups, both internal and external groups. as well as how service providers manage the interaction with other service providers, carrier access management. Kind of the final swim lane that we look at is the life cycle around products. So from creation of the product through the duration of the product through to the product's end of life. And again, things like new product introduction is an area that the BPM is very strong in. Changes to products, whether it's rate changes or other variations that happen, things like processes around equipment certification, as well as things like partner onboarding, especially as the mobile applications come into play with the 3G devices. This is an area that we see more and more activities around. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the areas that the BPM is really being effective in. Just to kind of give you a bit of a view of what really makes up kind of the BPM product suite, and certainly the Savvion product suite. It's made up of a number of components, from the modeling aspect, things that are much more exposable to the business community to define their processes, to our asset manager, which really takes those processes, allows collaboration and work to be done across the company, through to Studio, which really takes that and really prepares it for deployment, much more of an IT-centric aspect, through to everything on what you're seeing on the right side, which is really as it's executing, the managing interactions that people and systems are doing, as well as having visibility into the metrics and activities from an end-to-end perspective, and being able to take that and really take those processes, modify them in enhancement, and then being able to associate them to rules and documentation, so you have a full end-to-end experience across those solutions. Now what Savvion has done is, on top of our core business process management product suite, we've developed industry-specific solutions, and it's for the telecom sector. It's what we call our communications foundation that houses a number of solutions that we have for the communications industry, including our communications order management solution, specifically around customer order management and network order management, solutions around trouble ticketing, returns and repairs, the customer experience management, number portability, and partner mobile application onboarding, just to name a few. And what I want to do is give you a little more of a deep dive into solutions around customer order management. Again, Clay had mentioned it's one that we see quite often, is one of the real pain points that service providers are facing. With the introduction of new services, with the bundling of services, it's just introduced a lot more challenges than had traditionally been in place. So in that, we've developed a solution set on top of our core BPM platform that really works in concert with service providers' OSS infrastructure. So coordinating across one or many order entry systems, through to managing the interaction across one or many network inventory systems, service activation systems, as well as a lot of the legacy platforms that are currently in place there, whether they're other provisioning systems, dispatch systems, or others, and right through to billing. Being able to coordinate the efforts across those, and being able to all along have visibility into the end-to-end process, and feed information back to the source order entry system for status and tracking all the way through. Being able to do these not just in a simple process manner, but in a much more complex hierarchical manner. And Clay had mentioned a lot of the challenges that relate to taking data objects and defining those heavily into the solution. Again, this is one of the things that we've been driving to on Savvion, to be able to take a full customer order, for example, and take that, decompose it into its various levels, and coordinate the efforts across the systems involved with the end-to-end process solution. That includes doing more advanced functionalities, like not just for new installs, but for changes, moves, adds, and disconnects of orders across bundled services, being able to do things like in-flight revisions or supplement orders, being able to do things like jeopardy and exception handling across those process streams. So a lot more of the more complex activities that are needed in the order management activities. Where that really starts coming into an advantage is as you apply this solution across multiple services. So this is one of the real challenges that service providers are facing with the bundling, the triple and quad play solutions. How do you bundle these services that in many cases were potentially sitting on varying different systems and being able to offer them in a common manner? It's one that we've really shined in and helped support that kind of changing view of how these end-to-end solutions can come into play. Being able to really offer kind of those full functional infrastructures and allow a much more rapid deployment of new services as well as dependencies across these services. And being able to do that in a way that gives full end-to-end visibility, not just across the process, but the whole hierarchy of processes that make up customer orders and service orders. Giving that full visibility of the metrics and dashboards that are critical to the operations, understanding where the pain points are and having a full pulse of the operations. As well as being able to manage the tracking of the data and the tasks that make up the end-to-end activities, so that actions like escalations, variations that need to take place to make sure that operations are not just working effectively, but have the least impact to the customer. Now, really, what's kind of unique about this model is it not just looks at business process management as a process, but it looks at it as a hierarchy of processes, where the hierarchy of processes are aligned to what's done on the service provider's order entry and CRM systems, aligning to what's in the product catalog. So taking a customer order, decomposing it into the service orders, for services like private line, IP services, DSL, managed services, and for each of those services, decomposing them into all the moving parts. And in doing that, being able to not just coordinate efforts at a certain level, but at multiple hierarchy levels, and which is really critical in being able to manage a lot of the legacy systems that are in play with service providers. Really, to kind of give you an example, we're want to describe some of the activities, for example, that happen with Level 3, a wholesale service provider that was using Savvion as the core end-to-end order management solution across all their services, from their transport, their IP content, and the wholesale voice services. Again, coordinating efforts across not just one, but many CRM systems and across a number of the downstream systems that came into play. Savvion was coordinating the efforts across these services into the main functional components that made up those solutions, the design, install, test, turn-ups, and bill starts for the various services. But being able to coordinate those not just at across the services, but with an ability to reuse and enhance some of the functions that were done by various groups. So as to reuse sub-processes across more than just the order management application. Example being able to take the work that field services is doing and have that same set of functions initiated, whether it's a customer order, a network order, or a trouble ticket. Also being able to take it to the next level where you can coordinate efforts across different applications. So, as customer orders are initiated, if there's things like capacity jeopardies that are triggered, being able to use that to drive network orders or new network builds, and those sort of correlations that happen across different applications. So again, you start seeing a lot of the advantages, not just being able to bundle the various services across activities, but being able to coordinate them across bigger applications. Kind of another example I wanted to use was in the wireless space. So Sprint, for their mobile service provider, used Savvion for the trouble ticketing and returns and repair process. And again, it's an ability to not just define problems that happen at customers' devices, but being able to use that to manage not just what would be traditionally a replacement, but being able to do repairs against those by taking kind of best knowledge and incorporating those into the solutions. Again, seeing some tremendous benefits from a customer perspective meant that things could be resolved within hours versus days, but had a tremendous impact on the revenue models for Sprint in terms of being able to see a return on investment within 72 days and just seeing ongoing savings with the solution. Again, seeing some real advantages as it's applied in the right arena. And finally, wanted to give an example of a cable and voice over IP service provider that really had a number of infrastructure solutions, whether they're for order management, for data capture, and really they were looking for a mechanism to monitor what those existing systems were doing and put business rules around what would be considered non-acceptable business conditions, being able to use that to trigger off jeopardies and exceptions. So really being able to apply BPM in a non-protrusive way to be able to tap information at various points in the system and use that information to start better modeling how the actual end-to-end solutions work, giving full visibility to the various milestones, to the various levels of activities, and defining things like SLAs and defining conditions. This should happen before this, and using those to really drive when exceptions should be dealt with. So fantastic way of being able to resolve issues without having to modify a lot of the investment that was already there in a lot of the legacy systems. So again, great use of BPM in a manner that leverages the existing assets, but gives visibility. And really the critical benefit was being able to define problems, resolve them before customers understand it's a problem. So hopefully that helps give you some of the use cases and examples of where BPM has really had an effective impact on the telecom industry. That kind of covers what I wanted to do, but certainly, if you're like to have a lot more information about solutions that Savvion has in the telecom sector, please contact me, and we would love to be able to give a little more detail into those solution sets. So, Greg, that's it from my side.
All right, Sanjay, thank you very much. And as we mentioned in the early promotion for this webcast, for folks that are registering and attending today and or in the archived version of this event, there's a complimentary communication solution brief from Savvion available as well with some good information in there. And so I'd like to thank both Clay Richardson with Forrester and Sanjay Kumar with Savvion for your time today. But before I let both of you go, I wanted to just dive into a few additional areas to maybe provide some further clarification for our members. As I mentioned early on, we have a pretty large contingent of organizations from communications and media within our 40,000 member community. And so if you're both game, I thought we'd dive into a few questions.
Absolutely.
All right, great.
Okay.
Well, we talked a lot today about how folks can utilize BPM internally to kind of get their house in order. But I was curious to see if either of you are seeing any type of ripple effect or communication providers that are adopting BPM being able to extend the benefits of it to customers and partners and increase efficiency or any of those things. Are you seeing any signs of that?
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that. In general, the general trend that we're seeing is that companies adopting BPM that have been using BPM for the last year or so, or at least a year, are looking to extend it to their customer base, to actually allow customers to initiate processes and run processes. And so a handful of the telecoms vendors that I've been working with, they have actually provided the capability on their website, if you will, for their customers to initiate processes and track processes. And it is a challenge. I mean, we're definitely seeing this as a challenge because it does require additional customization within their corporate website environment to be able to initiate those processes, manage the user experience, and tie it back to the BPM environment. But the benefit is reduce, or what they're looking to gain, is reduced wait times and call times to submit and resolve issues. So that's one of the areas that we're seeing in terms of BPM being extended beyond just the internal operational processes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're seeing the exact same thing. It's one that actually comes into effect quite often. The traditional value of BPM is being able to go across silos within an organization, but as service providers are really looking to optimize their costs, they're bringing their trading partners into the end-to-end order streams. So, for example, in areas like order management, in device returns and repairs, active members of their trading partners and suppliers are involved with those processes. And incorporating them into those end-to-end processes not just allows them to better the use of the cost, but it also allows them to measure and make decisions based on how effective the different suppliers are. And as Clayton mentioned, really incorporating that to customers, having them as part of the end-to-end view, has allowed them to much more dramatically improve the customer experience as well as optimize a lot of the things that they're looking for. So definitely a trend that we're seeing.
All right, super. Thank you, Sanjay, with that. Well, we live in a world where the only constant that we have is change, and telecom is definitely, in that category between mergers, acquisitions, and expanded service offerings. Could either of you talk a little bit about how BPM is used and being used to align and manage those processes and standards across the different business units with constantly shifting sands?
Yeah, I'll let you take that, Sanjay.
Sure. It's actually one that we're seeing driving a lot of the need for the business process management space. In telecom, with kind of the bundled offerings, really a lot of those offerings come across systems that were not traditionally done by a company. And this is where telcos and cable cos started competing with each other, how mergers and acquisitions came in to be able to have the offering of voice, data, content, and now mobile as part of those offerings. That was really driven by mergers and acquisitions. The experience of the customer really has to be one seamless view, but in the background, these make up a number of different system infrastructures. BPM has been very effective, and we've been finding, especially our order management solution, being used in a way that orchestrates that view, managing the different system infrastructures underneath, but giving that common and consistent view that could be exposed to the customer and to the business community.
Yeah, and kind of following up on that, one of the things we're also seeing is with this consolidation, a lot of times providers are acquiring regional vendors to kind of build out their portfolio offerings globally or across the nation, if you will, across the country. And what they're doing is they're using BPM as a common language, or business process management as a common language, to bring all of these regions to the table to begin looking at what are the best practices, what are the best processes even that should be propagated to everyone. And so it really does become that platform for integrating the company to really follow a process that really works for everyone. So where I've seen this work really well is telecom providers bringing in one region that they think has a really good process, actually automating that process, and then looking at extending it out across the different regions gradually. So we've seen that become very effective to keep up with the pace of change and actually keep up with the pace of acquisition, if you will. So.
Right. And Clay, would you say, do you see folks' ability to deal with change as a major competitive differentiator, as we head out over the next 3 to 5 years?
Definitely. To be honest, I think the telecoms industry is really trying to catch up with this new world that we're in terms of how fast things move and how fast cycles are. But I think the telecoms providers that we've worked with have really done a good job of adjusting to this innovation cycle. And I think the ones that will succeed over time will be the ones that are not only able to adjust rapidly to change, but actually initiate change. And so you're seeing vendors where they're using business process management as a competitive differentiator, even where you, like you were talking before about being able to track and manage issues or extending the process out to customers. In some cases, we're seeing providers actually use that as a differentiator to say, look, we can extend our process out to help you make decisions and for you, our customers, become more competitive in the business side of telecom. And so we do see that as a key element, companies that can adjust to change, but also those companies that can initiate change and drive innovation are the ones that will win in the end.
Excellent. Well, and one of the things we hear quite often is folks obviously have multiple projects and deployments and things underway. And so, Sanjay, could I ask you to speak a little bit for those folks that may have both BPM and SOA initiatives ongoing at the same time? How are these things getting aligned for the telecom industry, or how are you maybe helping to support some of those efforts of bringing that together?
Sure. It's actually a very hot topic in the telecom industry. From an architectural perspective, SOA is really the way that service providers are looking at their key operations, certainly things like order management to run. BPM is really, it's critical in a SOA infrastructure to be able to really be the business orchestration layer across the end-to-end solution as well as within some of the services themselves. But what's interesting is, a lot of service providers also say that they'd like to go there, but they have a tremendous amount of legacy systems that really are quite a bit away from being able to transform to SOA. One of the advantages of BPM, and certainly what we've been leveraging our comm solution, is being able to handle both those hybrids, where it may be a very lean SOA infrastructure, but you may also have a lot of segments that are quite far away from being a services-based solution and needing to deal with some very rigid legacy systems that are in place. So it's the one advantage BPM has, if used in the most effective way, allows the service provider to move towards SOA and becomes really the heart of the SOA components, but it also allows the service provider to deal with what they really have right now, which is billions of dollars worth of assets of legacy systems that cannot easily be transformed.
All right, great. And Clay, did you want to add to that? Or I know Forrester's done a great deal of coverage around organizations being able to leverage BPM to get even more value out of ERP and existing systems. And any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, and ultimately, I think Sanjay hit the nail on the head. Is BPM and SOA combined together really allow organizations to focus on not just the front-end collaboration, but also to tie legacy applications together. And so when we start talking about ERP and the different packaged apps that are out there, most of these apps have some form of interface or some way to introspect them, but just coding that by hand all the time is not really a good investment or a good investment of time. And so it's essential that you have a BPM platform that really allows you to leverage the integration-centric aspect of BPM, so you can tie back into these existing legacy assets in terms of leveraging them as much as possible and leveraging your investment there. Yep.
All right, great. Well, one of the other hot buttons for our members we get a lot of questions about and a lot of inquiries on is around business visibility and performance management. And so I was hoping, as we've just about run through our time, but we're hoping to squeak this one in, if I could ask both of you to comment on how BPM is helping organizations to get greater visibility, from business drivers and strategic goals down to operational processes, and how BPM is playing a role there.
Yeah, I can take a crack at it first. what we're seeing really is it's essential for organizations implementing BPM to start at a strategic level, to really understand what are the key objectives within the organization that BPM can address. And that should be at an executive strategic level. What does the executive care about? What are his top 3 priorities? And then associating BPM to one, if not all of those priorities. And ultimately, when you think like that, when you approach BPM from that perspective, it usually drives out very focused KPIs that the business cares about across the board. And so this really allows BPM to stay focused on delivering value because your KPIs or your KPIs are connected to specific strategic objectives that are measurable and traceable and trackable. And so by having that, you can really take BPM from strategic to tactical to implementation, and it all stays aligned for you. And so otherwise, what we're seeing on the other end, where organizations just kind of adopt BPM without connecting it to strategy, without looking at it in terms of KPIs, usually it becomes just an IT activity and has a higher degree of failure because it's not adopted. In fact, some of the customers that I've spoken to recently that were not able to tie BPM directly to strategy, my feedback to them was just don't try to implement BPM right now just because more than likely you are going to fail. Wait until you're able to really identify the strategic drivers in the company that BPM can support. So that's Forrester's stand is you have to have it connected to strategy if you want to get the value out of it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it at all, but it means don't go and invest $1 million and hope to get high ROI if it's not connected to strategy. So, Sanjay?
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with what Clay has, and just to kind of add to that, really, the advantage of business process management is it not just coordinates the efforts that are being done across people and systems, it gives full end-to-end visibility, a visibility that generally is not available to service providers. So from the end-to-end aspects, the data, the metrics that come through there, being able to really understand what the pulse of the business is. But where you really start being able to take this to the next level is as you identify what the metrics are and what you're really looking to measure, being able to use that to trigger off other actions. So, how do you constantly improve and monitor your core processes, knowing that your business is constantly changing? And that nature of change for within BPM is really where you start seeing that advantage. But it also allows that sort of trigger point. If you're seeing parameters that are acceptable, let them work that way. But as you're seeing them go beyond a certain level, you need to trigger off change. And it's that whole end-to-end cycle that BPM introduces that really starts coming into advantage within a service provider.
All right, well, very good, Sanjay. Well, listen, with that, I'm going to let you be the last word for the day, as we've got a little bit over our time, but thought we were covering some really valuable ground for our members, and so wanted to make sure we were able to run that string out. But I wanted to thank both you gentlemen, Clay Richardson with Forrester Research and Sanjay Kumar with Savvion. I want to thank you both for coming down and lending your expertise today. For the folks at Savvion, really want to thank you, not only just for hosting today's roundtable, but Savvion's ongoing support of our community. It's been a partnership from the very, very early days of BPM when just getting off the ground, and we appreciate your ongoing support in helping us to bring this education out to our members. We're also very thrilled to have Savvion's CEO, Dr. Katabchi, on our supplier council and his input to our ongoing content and focus here. So, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you both very much. I'd also like to thank our members for their time today, and we look forward to hosting you at an upcoming webcast in the near future. And for those of you that happen to be in the Northeast, hopefully we'll see you at the first week of November at Brainstorm, New York. Thank you.